Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. I am your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest with the Legionaries of Christ and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the StarQuest Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 300, the big 300. So if you've gotten this far, we're getting towards the end. And we are covering Gaudium et Spes 9. And paragraph 9 is on people want a society worthy of man. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about the need to look at how modern culture situations affect us. Today, we will continue the section titled Introductory Statement of Men in the Modern World. And the overall theme will be there's an increasing demands for dignity from all corners, and this points to a deeper longing that we have. So paragraph 9, which we're covering today, has 5 subparagraphs. We're going to deal with it in 3 parts, A and B, C, and then D and E. 9A and B are about people, especially those in new nations, increasingly demand their human dignity. C is about people in disenfranchised groups want to be part of the world's goods. And D and E talk about all of these pointing towards man's deeper longing. So before we begin with A and B, I want to just make a note, and my notes actually have this a little later, but make a note of the context. If you remember, in that time period right after World War II, from 1945, the end of World War II, to 1965, when this document was written, we have this great time of decolonization in Asia and Africa. I just counted 26 countries had gained independence from the UK in those 20 years alone. This has probably about 2.5 billion people in them right now. Obviously, over half of those are in India itself. Well, if I do 2.5 billion, because India is 1.4, but there's a lot in these other countries as well. So when we talk about new nations in this paragraph, in these subparagraphs, that's what we're talking about. That's what I assume that the Vatican II fathers are referring to. It might not be as obvious to us today because this is a thing much further in the past for us than it was for them, as something much more contemporary. So let's begin A and B on people, especially new nations, have increasingly demand for their human dignity. A. Meanwhile, the conviction grows not only that humanity can and should increasingly consolidate its control over creation, but even more, that it devolves on humanity to establish a political, social, and economic order which will growingly serve man and help individuals as well as groups to affirm and develop the dignity proper to them. B. As a result, many persons are quite aggressively demanding these benefits, of which, with vivid awareness, they judge themselves to be deprived either through injustice or unequal distribution. Nations on the road to progress, like those recently made independent, desire to participate in the goods of modern civilization, not only in the political field but also economically, and to play their part freely in the world scene. Still, they continually fall behind while very often their economic and other dependence on wealthier nations advances more rapidly. In the 20th century, and even still more today in the 21st century, we have a sense that man has increasing dominion over the world. Man increasingly has control of the world. We can manage it, we can control it, and things like that. We look at a satellite view at night from a country, and you can see all the lights and all the population there. And in that situation where we have that kind of physical dominion, we have to look and see how our political systems serve man, how the politics really serve this. Because we can say, hey, we have dominion, but it's all just serving one person. That's not really justice. Although it's obviously not perfect, this seems to indicate this idea of democracy and freedom of the press, freedom, things like that, which were promoted at this time, are generally good. And at this time, we also see people aggressively demanding these freedoms, these rights, and these are good things to have. Now, moving on to 9b here, it talks about new nations who want to partake in these goods of modern society. At the time, they were very fragile situations, both economically and politically, and they were often exploited. Today, we have a lot of things better, but there's still a lot of exploitation. There's still a lot of these situations where a company comes in and underpays laborers because they can get away with it and things like that, or children working almost as slaves to mine certain minerals or things like that. They want to be part of the free world, but unfortunately there's also this issue of sometimes there's these strongman dictators who take control. So it's a challenge. There's not really a kind of magic bullet solution for this. We often wish there was, but I don't see one in a situation like this. Moving on to 9c. People in disenfranchised groups want to be part of the world's goods. Let's read it. C. People hounded by hunger call upon those better off. Where they have not yet won it, women claim for themselves an equality with men before the law, and in fact, laborers and farmers seek not only to provide for the necessities of life, but also to develop the gifts of their personality by their labors, and indeed take part in regulating economic, social, political, and cultural life. Now, for the first time in human history, all people are convinced that the benefits of culture ought to be and actually can be extended to everyone. So we see here, even with these great advances in economics and dominion and things like that, there are still many left behind. There are still people who go hungry. There are still people who lack basic health care. It notes here the idea of the positive nature of female equality. They should be the same before the law. If you hit a woman, hit a man, same punishment. If you steal from a woman, steal from a man, same punishment. Things like that. They should have the right to vote, etc. And we see the laborers and farmers, kind of the lowest economic classes, they feel exploited. And as I mentioned in the last one, talking about different countries, that is still the case in many places. I don't think there's a huge exploitation systematic going on as much in these more developed nations, but in less developed nations, it is still a very big issue. And it's good that all people today are convinced of rights. This was something that was kind of new in 1965. Today, it's kind of been almost accepted that this idea of rights and dignities for all people is generally accepted across the world, which is better and a little different. Moving on to our last two subparagraphs today, D and E is talking about how these demands for rights, these demand for good things, they all point to man's deeper longing. Let's go. D. Still, beneath all these demands lies a deeper and more widespread longing. Persons and societies thirst for a full and free life worthy of man, one in which they can subject to their own welfare all that the modern world can offer them so abundantly. In addition, nations try harder every day to bring about a kind of universal community. E. Since all these things are so, the modern world shows itself at once powerful and weak, capable of the noblest deeds and the foulest. Before it lies the path to freedom or to slavery, to progress or to retreat, to brotherhood or hatred. Moreover, man is becoming aware that it is his responsibility to guide aright the forces which he has unleashed, and which can enslave him or minister to him. That is why he's putting questions to himself. So these subparagraphs talk about how we all want these deep realities of man. There is much good in the modern world, technology, development, understanding of dignity and rights, and everyone wants that. Not just individually, they want it as their group, their tribe, their nation, etc. And subparagraph D here is giving you this general idea of optimistic idea that, hey, there's goodness, there's greatness, all these things to good. But E then brings us back to earth. It's a little less optimistic. The modern world has power, but that power is also weakness because that power is a functional power, a practical power, and that practical or functional power can be used for good or for evil. There's been in this time a great awareness of this power. If we think of the historical context in which it was written right after, or reasonably closely after, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we think of how this idea of, oh my goodness, the Soviets and the Americans could blow each other to the Stone Age and things like that. That would be, wow, we have this power. But how are we using this power? That's a big question. I really look at this today and I think, how are we going to use this AI power? AI is not in itself evil, but there's a lot of ways that AI could be used in evil ways, in exploitative ways, and we have to ask about those. We have to think today and apply this idea, which was probably at least partially referring to nuclear weapons and nuclear power back in the 1960s, to AI today. Finally, this paragraph concludes with the line, that is why he is putting questions to himself. We need to ask the questions. We need to ask these questions. We need to look at them and think of why we're doing things or what we can do to make the world a better place. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can donate to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time, monthly, or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Gaudium et Spes. That is paragraph 10 on the division between good and evil goes for every human heart. And that paragraph will conclude this first section, and then we'll get into part 1. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which can provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X. If you want more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. We've also set up an email for questions and comments at Vatican2@sqpn.com, and my own website, frmatthewlc.com, has a contact form. Amen.